Welcome to Art Ed Radio, the podcast for art teachers. This show is produced by The Art of Education, and I'm your host, Tim Bogatz. As much as we want to be the perfect teacher, or as much as we think we are the perfect teacher, there's still those times when our projects, our presentations, and our lessons fail, sometimes miserably. And it's at that point, when our plans are out the window, that we need to be at our best. We need to figure out how to make those failures relevant and how to salvage a learning experience for our students when things aren't running as smoothly as we had hoped. When do we stick it out, and when do we see it through to the end? What do we do when we are forced to teach on the fly? The man, the myth, the legend, Andrew McCormick will join me in a little while and talk about some of his most spectacular failures and exactly how we cope when our best laid plans go bad. Before we jump into the episode today, I want to tell you a little bit about the summer slate of classes offered by The Art of Education, all of which you can find on theartofed.com/courses. Every course is offered every single month this summer on topics from curriculum design to classroom management to assessment, even studio classes. Now, those studio classes are my absolute favorite to teach, and if you want to work with me, I'll be teaching studio ceramics in June and the brand new studio painting class in July. No matter what class you want, though, get registered soon. All of the classes start on the first of the month, so you have about a week to go. And again, go to theartofed.com/courses to see what course might work for you and get signed up today. Now, we've all had a project or perhaps multiple projects that have failed, and sometimes failed miserably. Okay, picture this. You start with a project that you've done a dozen times before. Okay, and this is something that you're used to working with. Okay, and every time you've done this project, it's been a success. Okay, this is the way you've always done it. Everything should go off without a hitch. But for whatever reason, the lesson this time is an absolute disaster. The kids aren't engaged. The outcomes aren't what you're looking for. You know there aren't going to be good results, and you're not even sure if there's learning going on. What do you do as a teacher at that point? What do you do when your best laid plans go bad? And when do you know if it is time to get rid of that project? Now, a stubborn part of me used to think that I needed to see every project through to the end. I'd be improvising different things, trying to salvage a project with little patches that were never going to work. I've learned since then, though, that it really is okay to get rid of something that isn't working. Okay, think about it this way. Are you better teaching on the fly, improvising, and trying to save a lost cause? Are you better scrapping something, reflecting on what you've learned, and moving on to the next great thing? Let's talk about that reflection piece, though, because I think that's key. How do we take advantage of when the failure becomes a learning opportunity? I think being able to reflect on that is a huge part of the process, and you need to share that process with your students, every part of it, every bit of that lesson. If the lesson failed because of a mistake or some mistakes that you made, don't be afraid to share that with your kids. Confess to that. Let them know what's going on. But on the other side, if you don't know why it failed, don't be afraid to share that with your kids either. Sometimes it's all right to not be the expert. And sometimes it's all right to have kids help you figure out where things went wrong. And I think the biggest takeaway from that is that we can let kids know that failure is part of that artistic process. And we can talk about what they can learn from that failure. And from there, you can get your students' input. Ask them what they think should happen next and listen to them, like really listen. There can be an important part of the process as well. That process of student input is actually one thing that I do want to talk to Andrew about. So let's go ahead and bring him on. We'll talk a little bit about projects that fail, when you want to ditch them, and how to create a more viable learning environment out of that situation. We'll go ahead and bring him on right now. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
Hey, Tim, I'm doing good, man. How you doing?
I am doing really well. And we're going to talk tonight about projects that fail miserably and how you can turn those around, what you can do with those things. So I'll start off with this one for you. What would you say are the percentage of the projects that you present that are just complete and utter failures?
Well, man, if we're talking failures, I feel like you've come to the right guy. Like I'm the expert of failing. But seriously, like I've been teaching for a long time in like semester, every day. I think that's something to think about too. Are we elementary teachers and it's like on a cycle or semesters? But I've been doing semesters for a long time, and I always feel like I get between 7 and 9 projects done. So 7 to 9 big lessons, and I always tell kids like, we're gonna have one where it's just like dynamite and everyone loves their work and everyone takes it home. You're like, oh, I'm so happy. And then there's always gonna be one that is like a dog, just like an absolute failure. And you're gonna want to take it home. You're gonna want to burn it. You're gonna want to forget everything about it. So, I mean, what is that? 1 out of 8? Like that really does feel like that's what it is for me. And I've kind of come to expect that. And I feel like if I don't have one of those, I didn't try enough new things, and if I have too many of those, I'm doing something wrong, and I need to reconsider. But yeah, I'd say 1 per every 8. It's about my average.
Yeah, so that brings up a couple of things, I think, because back when I was teaching elementary school, like you really don't mind a project flopping because you're probably going to teach it 6 or 7 more times, right? Like you have so many more kids coming in, you can always fine tune, you can always adjust things. But, if this is your only section of ceramics and that flops, or, this is your only painting class and it flops, it makes it a little bit more stressful. But, just kind of going through, if you do have one of those projects, that absolutely fails and you're like, okay guys, this has been fun, critique was great, recycling bin's right there, you're probably trying something new. And do you think that most of those failures come from that sort of sense of adventure or that sense of trying something new? Are there some other reasons or other causes that make those projects fail?
Without a doubt, it's never of another reason. It's always just that it's something new. Like I've never done a project that flopped that I was like left scratching my head where I said, well, boy, that worked last year really well. I wonder what happened. Yeah. It's always, oh, we're going to try this new thing I've been thinking about. And, you don't think of X, Y, or Z, the paperweight or the materials or the this or the that, or you misjudge how long or short something's going to take. So it's always for me because I'm trying something new. And, to be honest, I think that's actually really, really important. And I think that's when my kids, like they see me as the teacher kind of nervously excited. And I tell them like, guys, I've never done one of these before. Like, for example, like I just did a 4-color linoleum print and I was like, okay, guys, like in theory, like I know how this works. And like I've done like a 2-color, but like I've never done a 4-color. We're going to try it. And, I think that they like that challenge. And I try to frame it that way. Like, you're the group that I really think like I want to test this out on because I think you guys can handle it. And they like it. And, they know. And they know sometimes if I think the way that works so well is when I frame it that way and I'm upfront with them. I'm like, this is totally new. Then when there is a student who's just like, man, I am horrible at this, they kind of don't blame themselves. They kind of blame me. And like, I've got thick enough skin, broad enough shoulders. Like I can handle that. That's fine. So I think that's always worked really well is just be upfront and honest with them. You're trying something new.
Yeah. And, for me, I've always found that kids love being the guinea pig. Like you said, you can just tell them, hey guys, I've never taught this lesson before. This is something new I want to try. And I think you are the class to do it. And, then they get this huge sense of themselves and feel like they're really important and they're really into whatever you're going to be trying. But I want to circle back around to something else you said, if you're just trying this in front of your class for the first time. Okay. So here's my question. I always try things on my own before I present them to a class. Like, do you think teachers have a responsibility to go through that so they can present the correct way to do that? Or do you think it's good for teachers to, just kind of try and possibly fail in front of their kids, having never done that before?
Ooh, there's a lot of different ways to take this because I remember being a new teacher. I mean, I would take artwork home and I would practice it and I would prep it and I would get all of like my examples, my demos, like all the way done, all the along the step of the way.
Yeah.
And you know, like you start having a family and you got kids and commitments. It's like, oh, winging this and colored pencils and denatured alcohol. I think this will work. And you just try to see if it works. And you know, so some of it's just the logistics of time. Like sometimes it's hard to test everything and you take your best guess.
Yeah.
But, and maybe I'm just rationalizing my own failures and making it okay for myself. But I do think sometimes it's nice for your students to see you fail and adopt and be like, I'm going to scrap this and I'm going to do it this way and like make it work and pivot and make an artwork better given the failures that kind of worked into it. Now, sometimes your students are going to like call you out on your BS and like, you're just trying to make me feel better that, you know, this didn't turn out well. But sometimes I'm like, no, like the way that like that didn't quite work exactly how we thought, like it's actually cooler now. It looks, you know, worn or retro or vintage. That's cool, right? And they're like, yeah, it's all right. So I think, and I recently had a project that went like that. Something didn't quite work like I wanted. We had to kind of switch it up a little bit. And I talked to students about making it work. Like, okay, you thought this was going to happen. The way that the rubber cement and the paint didn't quite cover it up, you know, now we got to make what we have work. And I actually think that piece of adaptability is like really, really important. So, you know, I don't know if we should intentionally design projects that are going to fail and fizzle out on our kids. But at the same time, it's not the worst thing in the world when it does happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that problem solving that comes with, you know, adapting really is a valuable lesson. And, you know, I think that's a good point. Like, do we want to set our kids up for failure to teach them that lesson? You know, I personally, you know, would shy away from that. But, you know, I think it's something to think about. I think it's something to consider.
But on that note, there's some like language written out there for like partnership of the 21st century, and it's like flexibility and adaptability. I've actually designed a couple projects. I don't do this as much with like my younger students, where I deliberately have a day where it's like, and now you're going to spill paint on purpose over half of your artwork. And then like I make them deal with like problems. And it's like, you thought you were doing this and now you're doing this. And sometimes I liken it to the phrase like, you know, you can't make an omelet without cracking a few eggs. Like they have to deal with it. Now, I've received enough like eyeball daggers from students who were so ticked at me that I like gave them this curveball that they had to deal with, that I've kind of shied away from it. But every once in a while, I'll bring that out, like a project that deliberately has like just a weird curveball in it that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I like that idea. I don't know. I feel like that's really setting your kids up to hate you a little bit, though.
I can handle it, man. Okay. I totally can handle it. I'm a big boy.
You're like, but you guys are learning. And
well, it's a funny thing is like they don't like it at first, and you'd be amazed. I'm always amazed. A couple days later, they're like, man, I'm really glad we had to like sand away this or drop, you know, half of it, you know, cover half of it with paint this. Or sometimes I'll do this thing where I make them for 30 minutes, give their artwork to another student in class. And then it's like, okay, now the other person gets to draw and you're drawing. They're like, ah! Like just really upset. But it's like, it kind of loosens them up. And something I've been talking a lot with my colleague this last year about is like, teaching students to be a little less precious with their artwork. It's really forced them to think about the process versus the product. And like, you know, okay, when things backfire and everything doesn't have to be perfect. And maybe it's better now that it kind of went through some different iterations.
Yeah. And so, okay, let's look at that this way. If or when that happens and you start to, you know, make kids think about, you know, why did this happen? What part of the process am I in? Where can I go from here? Like when that happens and it's an unplanned failure, like how do you turn that into something salvageable? Like how do you know when to go through that reflection process and try and turn it into something better? Or how do you know when to just ditch it? Say, you know what, we're done with this. We have failed. Let's move on.
You know, I think I said this on a couple episodes ago, how teaching's kind of like being a comedian, and it's like knowing your audience and know what they can take and know what they'll find funny. You know your students and you kind of know that look on their face where they're just like almost ready to cry out of exacerbation. They're just
Yes.
like, I'm so done with this. I'm like, okay, fine. You can be done with it. Like, that's fine. We can call this a failure. You can recycle it. You can burn it, throw it away. Let's move on. And then there's that look on their face where they're like, oh, this wasn't like, keep going, like change it up, learn from it. I mean, you kind of know. And I feel like if you don't know, you probably don't know your kids well enough. And, I've adopted the attitude, like, I'm totally fine with a kid scrapping a project if it's just a complete dog.
Right.
Show me another way that they've learned something. Or maybe I just tell them, like, listen, you don't have to take this out to its logical ending point because it is not going to be good. I'll give you a grade on the process that I saw, and I saw you learning, but we don't need to, drag this out any longer.
Yeah. And I'm the same way with that, where, a kid will come up to me like, this is not going how I want it to. And, I always turn that back around on them. Like, is it worth finishing? And they can make that decision, and if they decide it's not worth finishing, what can they do to show me that they've learned these concepts? Or what would you like to do instead?
Right.
To, kind of show what you've done, show what you've learned. But, if a kid decides to kind of ditch things, what do you talk to them about when they are moving on to that next thing? Like, what lessons do you want them to learn from that failure?
Well, I mean, sometimes it's just like project specific. It's like, hey, remember when I said you can't make clay and like put a ton of water in the bottom or it's going to fall apart, and then it fell apart because you didn't listen? You should probably listen to me next time. So some of it's just structural, or it's like specific to the project. Sometimes it's just like, hey, you should have taken a little bit more time at the beginning to come up with a better idea. I have a couple phrases that I tell my kids, and these may not be safe for work or safe for home, but sometimes I tell them, like, you can't shine a turd. Like, if it's not good from the beginning, like, don't try to make it any better. So sometimes it goes back to that original idea, right? Like, maybe that just needs to be better right off the get-go.
Yeah. And, sometimes I think just, I don't know if I'd go with the shine a turd phrasing, but, you can talk to kids about why things aren't working and make them kind of reflect on how they've gotten to that point. But then I guess, if we transition that into what you do as a teacher, like if you have one of those lessons that has failed, like your kids' projects are failing as well, like, what do you look at? Like, how do you reflect on your lesson? How do you look at, what you can do to change things, what you can do to make things more meaningful? Like, do you try and change up what you're doing, or do you generally just say, I'm scrapping that project?
I think it depends on the degree of failure. If it's just like as an artist, if it's like, okay, I was really close, but not quite right. It's the same with as a teacher. It's like, okay, that project was close to totally hitting and being successful, but maybe I did some things procedural wise or material wise that if I tighten those up, it'd be a little bit better. A friend of mine once told me that you should make artwork like you think you're a rock star, but then look at it afterwards and critiquing it like you're just complete crap. And there's this like level, or there's this notion of being like really honest and frank and critical with yourself, and don't sugarcoat it. If it didn't work out, like really don't take it personal, but look at it and say, like, why didn't this work well? And the thing that's really worked for me is I have a colleague that I trust very much, and it's like, hey, why isn't this working as well as I think it should? And she'll give it to me. She'll just say, like, listen, you shouldn't have done that. Or you're trying to do too much. That's often kind of like my go-to mistake, is I'm trying to get the kids to do like too much stuff. And if I would have just scaled back, they probably would have had more success. So I think adding a person into the collaborative, reflective mix is definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah, I'll agree with that completely. And also one other point, that honesty thing works for any discussion you have when you're reflecting on things, whether it's critiques with the kids or talking to your colleagues or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my kids think I'm too harsh, but I'm like, I'm just being honest about what's going on here. And it's helpful if you're direct. You don't beat around the bush. You talk about, what needs to change, what needs to be different. But one last question before I let you get out of here. Yep. As you're doing that reflection piece on your lesson, do you ever bring kids into that discussion? Like, do you want to show them, like, hey, this is why we failed. This is what I want to do differently. What do you guys think we can do differently? Like, do you think that teaching, about those failures or discussing those sort of failures with the projects is worthwhile? Like, is it good to bring kids into that discussion to kind of teach them that lesson as well?
Oh, totally. And, one of the things I enjoy kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum of critiquing your assignments and your works and your lessons, I'll let kids brainstorm with me. Like, what do we want to do next? What kind of haven't we done? So if I love doing that, I better enjoy doing the back end of it too. And I do. The thing that I do quite a bit is at the end of the semester, I'll kind of ask kids, and we'll just talk like, okay, what project was the best? Which one did we like the most? And what was really clicking? What work did you do that was like most meaningful or the best? And then like, which one was that dog? And sometimes I can pick it and like what I think was the dog or the worst one, they also agree. And then sometimes I'm kind of shocked. Like, I have this one project. It's like they're stabbing me in the heart every year. When like, my least favorite project was old-timey mythology. That's what I call it. And I'm like, no, I love that project. It's like cross-disciplinary and it's got social studies and research and drawing. And like, yeah, it's boring. I'm like, oh. So somehow, I need to take their criticism and feedback, and I need to revamp that one. I actually didn't do it this last semester because I'm like, all right, the people have spoken. I won't do that one then, I guess. So.
All right, fair enough. I'm glad to hear you're receptive about those things because
I am receptive, but I go home at night and cry a little bit, when they break my heart like that.
All right. Well, I'm going to leave you alone so you can go home and cry right now. And we'll wrap it up there. So thanks for joining me tonight, Andrew.
Thanks, Tim. We'll see you later.
Bye. All right. A big thanks to Andrew McCormick for coming on and sharing with us about some of his failures and how we learn from some of those failures. Yeah, but I want to ask you, what do you do when your best laid plans go bad? And whether you decide to stick it out or whether you drop the project by the wayside, make sure that you keep in mind the learning that's happening with your kids. Okay, that learning might take the form of some reflection on the current project, some changes moving forward, or it might take the form of a class trip to the recycling bin and a new project starting the next day. Hey, if something has flopped and you aren't going to salvage it, quit digging that hole. Okay? Improvisation and your short-term solutions aren't good for your students because you're not at your best as a teacher. Okay? Don't be afraid to cut your losses. Mark it down as a learning opportunity, take advantage of that learning opportunity, and then move on to the next. It's okay to fail, and it's okay to embrace your failure. Don't be afraid to admit when your plans have gone bad, because the sooner you can do that, the sooner you can learn through reflection and move on to something even bigger and even better. Art Ed Radio is developed, produced, and supported by the Art of Education with audio engineering by Michael Crocker. Please subscribe to Art Ed Radio on iTunes or your favorite podcast app, and convince all your friends to do the same thing. All those recommendations help new listeners find our show, which we always appreciate. You can find us at artedradio.com, where new episodes are released every Tuesday. We'll see you then.